The massive passenger ship Aurora Dawn glided through the dark space between Earth and the mining colony of New Geneva. Inside the ship, hundreds of passengers settled into their seats for the long journey ahead. The first-class section was quiet and comfortable, with wide seats and large windows showing the endless stars outside. Dr. Marcus Johnson walked down the narrow aisle carrying a small black case in his hand. He was a tall man with dark skin and kind eyes. He wore a simple blue suit and moved with the calm confidence of someone who had traveled this route many times before. Marcus found his seat in row 3 and placed his case carefully in the overhead compartment. He sat down and pulled out a small tablet to read while the ship prepared for departure. 3 seats behind him, Linda Patterson was already making herself comfortable in her expensive leather seat. She was a woman in her 50s with blonde hair pulled back tightly and sharp green eyes that seemed to judge everything around her. Linda owned several large farms on the outer colonies and considered herself very important. She wore a white dress with gold jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. As more passengers boarded the ship, Linda watched them with growing irritation. She did not like seeing so many different types of people in first class. In her mind, this section should be reserved for people like her, wealthy, successful, and what she considered to be the right kind of people. When she saw Marcus sitting a few rows ahead, her mood grew even worse. The ship's engines hummed to life and the captain's voice came over the speakers. "Welcome aboard the Aurora Dawn. We will be departing Earth orbit in 15 minutes. Please remain seated with your safety belts fastened until we reach cruising altitude." Linda unbuckled her belt immediately and stood up. She walked toward the front of the cabin, pretending to need something from the overhead storage. As she passed Marcus's seat, she stopped and stared at him for a long moment. "Excuse me?" she said in a loud voice that carried through the quiet cabin. "I think there might be some mistake here." Marcus looked up from his tablet with a polite smile. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" "Well, yes, actually there is," Linda said, crossing her arms. "I'm wondering how you managed to get a first-class seat. These tickets are very expensive, you know." The other passengers in nearby seats began to turn and look at what was happening. Marcus kept his voice calm and steady. "I purchased my ticket just like everyone else, ma'am." Linda laughed in a way that was not friendly at all. "Really? Because I know how much these seats cost and I'm just wondering if maybe you're in the wrong section. The economy seats are toward the back of the ship." "I assure you I'm in the right place," Marcus said quietly. He showed her his boarding pass with his seat number clearly marked. Linda looked at the pass but was not satisfied. Well, someone must have made an error. "People like you don't usually travel in first class. Are you sure you didn't get some kind of special discount or charity seat?" The words hung in the air like poison. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young woman across the aisle looked shocked at what she was hearing. An older man behind Linda shook his head in disgust but said nothing. Marcus felt the familiar weight of this kind of confrontation. He had experienced it many times before in his life, but it never got easier. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on him, waiting to see how he would respond. "Ma'am, I paid full price for my ticket," he said calmly. "I have every right to be here." Linda's voice grew louder. "I find that very hard to believe. Do you have any idea what these seats cost? I paid over 3,000 credits for mine. I work very hard for my money. And I don't appreciate having to sit near people who probably got their tickets through some government program." A flight attendant named Carol noticed the disturbance and walked over quickly. She was a kind-looking woman with brown hair and a concerned expression. "Is everything all right here?" "No, everything is not all right," Linda said before Marcus could answer. "I think this man is sitting in the wrong section. I want you to check his ticket and make sure he belongs in first class." Carol looked embarrassed by the request, but tried to remain professional. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Marcus handed it over without complaint. Carol looked at it carefully and then handed it back. "Everything appears to be in order, sir. You're in the correct seat." "That can't be right," Linda insisted. "There must be some mistake. I demand that you check with the captain about this. I have been flying with this airline for 20 years, and I have never had to deal with this kind of situation before. Ma'am, I can assure you that all passengers in this section have valid tickets," Carol said firmly. "Perhaps you should return to your seat now." Linda's face turned red with anger. "Don't tell me what to do. I am a very important customer, and I will not be spoken to that way. I want to speak to your supervisor right now." More passengers were staring now, and the atmosphere in the cabin had become very tense. Marcus wished he could just disappear. But he knew that moving to another seat would only make Linda think she had won. He had dealt with people like her before, and he knew that backing down would only encourage her behavior. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," Carol said again, her voice showing strain. "We need to prepare for departure." Linda pointed at Marcus. "I'm not sitting down until someone explains to me how he can afford to be here. I work hard for everything I have, and I don't think it's fair that people get special treatment just because of their color." The words hit the cabin like a slap. Now everyone was looking, and the silence was thick and uncomfortable. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had learned long ago that losing his temper in situations like this would only make things worse. "I think you should be careful about what you're saying," said a man from across the aisle. He was middle-aged with gray hair and wore a military uniform. "You're making assumptions about someone you don't even know." Linda turned her anger toward him. "I'm not making assumptions. I'm being realistic. Look at him and look at where we are. It doesn't add up." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The journey to New Geneva was going to be long, and it was clear that Linda was not going to let this go easily. The Aurora Dawn had cleared Earth's atmosphere and was now moving steadily through deep space. The view from the window showed nothing but stars and darkness, but inside the first-class cabin, the tension was growing thicker by the minute. Linda Patterson had returned to her seat, but she was far from finished with Marcus Johnson. Every few minutes she would make loud comments to anyone who would listen about the unfairness of the situation. She talked about how hard-working people like herself deserved better treatment and how standards were clearly declining. "I just don't understand how the airline can allow this," she said to the woman sitting next to her. "When I was young, first class meant something. It was for people who had earned their place in society through hard work and success." The woman next to her looked uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, but Linda continued talking. "I mean, look at him up there with his fancy tablet. I bet he's probably on some kind of government assistance. These diversity programs are getting out of hand." Marcus could hear every word, but he continued reading his tablet and tried to ignore her. He had important work to do during this flight, and he could not let Linda's ignorance distract him from his responsibilities. Carol, the flight attendant, approached Linda's seat again. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to keep your voice down. You're disturbing other passengers." "I'm disturbing them?" Linda asked loudly. "What about him? What about how his presence here is disturbing me? I paid good money for this ticket, and I expect to be comfortable during my flight." "Sir," Carol said, turning to Marcus, "would you be willing to move to another seat? We have some open spaces in the premium economy section." Marcus looked up from his tablet with surprise. "You're asking me to move because she's complaining about my race?" "No, sir, that's not what I meant," Carol said quickly. "I'm just trying to find a solution that makes everyone comfortable." "The solution is for her to stop harassing me," Marcus said calmly. "I'm not moving anywhere. I have every right to be in this seat." Linda stood up again and walked back toward Marcus. This time she was even more aggressive than before. "I want to see your identification," she demanded. "I want to know exactly who you are and how you got that seat." "I don't have to show you anything," Marcus replied. "You're not an airline employee and you have no authority over me." "Maybe not, but I have the right to know who I'm traveling with," Linda said. "For all I know, you could be anyone. You could be dangerous." The accusation was so ridiculous that several passengers gasped out loud. The man in the military uniform stood up from his seat. "Lady, you need to back off right now. What you're doing is harassment and it's completely unacceptable." "Don't call me lady," Linda snapped. "And don't tell me what's acceptable. I have concerns about the safety and security of this flight, and I have the right to voice those concerns." Marcus looked at the military man and nodded his thanks, but he could see that the situation was spiraling out of control. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. Inside was an identification card with his photo and some official-looking text. "Here," he said, showing the card to Linda. "This is who I am." Linda grabbed the card and studied it closely. "Dr. Marcus Johnson, Xenobiological Research Division," she read aloud. "What kind of made-up job is that?" "Xenobiological? That's not even a real word." "It means the study of alien life forms," Marcus explained patiently. Linda laughed harshly. "Alien life forms? You expect me to believe that? What kind of fantasy world are you living in? What Linda did not understand was that xenobiology was one of the most important fields of study in the galaxy. Ever since humanity had made contact with other intelligent species, the need to understand alien biology had become critical for survival. But Linda lived in a small world of farms and business deals, and she had no idea about the larger universe around her. It's a very real field of study, Marcus said, and a very important one. Important to who? Linda asked mockingly. I've never heard of it, and I consider myself to be a well-educated person. The military man shook his head in disgust. Ma'am, just because you haven't heard of something doesn't mean it's not real. There are a lot of things in this universe that you probably don't know about. Linda turned her anger toward him. And what would you know about it? Are you some kind of expert too? Actually, yes, the man said calmly. Colonel Frank Martinez, Earth Defense Force. And I can tell you that Dr. Johnson's work is extremely important to the security of all human colonies. This information seemed to surprise Linda, but she was too proud to admit that she might be wrong. Instead, she doubled down on her attacks. Well, if he's so important, then why doesn't he look more professional? And why is he traveling alone? Important people usually have assistants and security guards. Marcus almost smiled at that comment. If Linda only knew the truth about his current mission, she would probably faint. The black case in the overhead compartment contained research data that could save or doom entire worlds. He was traveling alone precisely because his mission was so sensitive that only a few people in the entire galaxy knew about it. But he could not tell Linda any of that. His work required secrecy, and he had learned long ago that the best way to handle people like her was to remain calm and professional, no matter how badly they behaved. I prefer to travel simply, he said. It helps me focus on my work. Work, Linda repeated sarcastically. What kind of work could you possibly be doing that's so important? Before Marcus could answer, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Captain Rodriguez's voice filled the cabin, but there was something different about his tone. He sounded tense and worried. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have received some updated information about conditions at our destination. There may be some delays in our arrival due to technical difficulties at the New Geneva colony. We will keep you informed as the situation develops. The announcement ended abruptly, leaving the passengers confused and concerned. Linda, however, saw this as another opportunity to attack Marcus. Technical difficulties, she said loudly. I bet this has something to do with people like him being put in positions they're not qualified for. When you lower standards, this is what happens. On the bridge of the Aurora Dawn, Captain Rodriguez stared at the emergency message that had just appeared on his communication screen. His hands were shaking slightly as he read the words again, hoping he had misunderstood something. But the message was clear, and it was terrifying. The message came directly from Earth Defense Command, marked with the highest level of security clearance. New Geneva colony has gone completely silent as of 800 hours. Last transmission reported unknown biological anomaly in deep mining sectors. All communication attempts have failed. Orbital scans show massive energy signatures of unknown origin. Approach with extreme caution. Do not attempt landing until further notice. Captain Rodriguez had been flying passenger ships for over 20 years, and he had never received a message like this. New Geneva was one of the most successful mining colonies in the sector, with over 50,000 people living and working there. The idea that the entire colony could just go silent was almost impossible to believe. He turned to his first officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim. Send a message back to Earth Command. Tell them we have 300 passengers on board, including families with children. Ask for updated instructions. Sarah's fingers moved quickly across the communication console. After a few minutes, she looked up with a worried expression. Sir, Earth Command is not responding to our requests for more information. All they're saying is to maintain our current course but prepare for possible delays. Captain Rodriguez knew that something very serious was happening at New Geneva, but he also knew that he could not panic his passengers. He had to find a way to keep them calm while figuring out what to do next. Keep trying to get more information, he told Sarah, and monitor all emergency frequencies. If something big is happening out there, someone will be talking about it. Back in the first-class cabin, the passengers were becoming increasingly nervous about the captain's announcement. The phrase technical difficulties could mean anything, and people's imaginations were starting to run wild. Linda Patterson was still focused on harassing Marcus, but now she had found a new angle for her attacks. "You see?" she said loudly to anyone who would listen. "This is what happens when you put unqualified people in important positions. I bet those technical difficulties are really just incompetence." Marcus was reading something on his tablet that seemed to require all of his attention. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, and his expression was serious and focused. He seemed to be receiving some kind of private communication, but Linda could not see what it was. "What are you looking at over there?" she demanded. "Are you getting some kind of inside information? Because if you know something about what's happening, you should share it with the rest of us." Marcus looked up from his tablet and met her eyes. For the first time since the harassment began, there was something hard and determined in his expression. "I don't know anything more than you do about the situation at New Geneva." It was not exactly a lie, but it was not the complete truth either. Marcus was indeed receiving private communications, but they were not about New Geneva. They were updates on his research and reminders about the importance of his current mission. However, as he read the latest message, he began to feel a growing sense of concern. The message was from his supervisor at the Xenobiological Research Division. "Marcus, we are receiving disturbing reports from several outer colonies about unusual biological activity. Cannot provide details over unsecured channels, but your expertise may be needed sooner than expected. Stay alert and be prepared for emergency deployment." Colonel Martinez had been listening to the conversation between Marcus and Linda, and he was becoming increasingly irritated with Linda's behavior. As a military officer, he understood the importance of maintaining order and treating people with respect, and Linda was failing on both counts. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you need to stop harassing this man. Your behavior is completely inappropriate, and it's making everyone on this flight uncomfortable." Linda turned toward him with fire in her eyes. "Don't lecture me about appropriate behavior. I'm a tax-paying citizen with the right to express my concerns, and my concern is that we have people in important positions who don't belong there." "What makes you think he doesn't belong there?" Martinez asked. "Do you know anything about his qualifications or his work?" "I know what I see," Linda replied. "And what I see is someone who probably got his job through affirmative action instead of merit. When you lower standards to meet quotas, this is what happens." Marcus felt his patience running thin, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had heard these accusations many times before in his career, and he knew that responding with anger would only make things worse. Instead, he decided to focus on his work and ignore Linda as much as possible. But ignoring Linda was becoming increasingly difficult. She seemed determined to make his life miserable for the entire flight, and she was not going to give up easily. Every few minutes, she would make another comment about affirmative action, diversity quotas, or unqualified people in important positions. "I just think people should earn their positions through hard work and merit," she said loudly, "not through government programs designed to make certain people feel better about themselves." A woman sitting nearby finally spoke up. "How do you know he didn't earn his position? You don't know anything about his education or his accomplishments." "I know enough," Linda said confidently. "I've been in business for 30 years and I know how these things work. When companies and organizations are forced to hire based on race instead of qualifications, standards inevitably decline." Marcus was beginning to realize that Linda was not just ignorant about his work. She was ignorant about a lot of things. She seemed to live in a bubble where she believed that success was only possible for people who looked like her and thought like her. The idea that someone different from her could be genuinely accomplished and important was something she simply could not accept. But what Linda did not know was that Marcus was far more accomplished and important than she could possibly imagine. His work had saved lives on multiple colonies, and his research was considered essential to humanity's survival in a dangerous galaxy. He had advanced degrees from the most prestigious universities on Earth, and he had been personally recruited by the government for his current position. The irony was that if Linda knew the truth about Marcus, she would probably be begging him for his autograph instead of trying to get him thrown off the flight. But Marcus could not reveal his true importance without compromising his mission, so he had to endure her attacks in silence. As the Aurora Dawn continued its journey through space, the tension in the cabin continued to grow. The mysterious problems at New Geneva, combined with Linda's ongoing harassment of Marcus, were creating an atmosphere of fear and confusion that was affecting everyone on board. The situation on the bridge of the Aurora Dawn was becoming more serious by the hour. Captain Rodriguez had been trying to contact New Geneva Colony for the past 3 hours, but every attempt met with complete silence. The orbital monitoring stations that normally tracked ship traffic around the colony were also not responding to his calls. More troubling were the energy readings that his ship's sensors were picking up from the planet's surface. The patterns were unlike anything in his database, and they seemed to be growing stronger every hour. Whatever was happening down there was getting worse, not better. Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked up from her station with concern written across her face. "Captain, I'm getting some very strange readings from the planet. The energy signatures are off the charts, and they seem to be concentrated around the main mining areas." "What kind of energy?" Rodriguez asked. "That's just it, sir. I don't know. It's not nuclear. It's not plasma, and it's not any kind of technology I've ever seen before. It's almost like the planet itself is generating some kind of biological energy field." The word biological caught the captain's attention. He had heard rumors about strange discoveries in the outer colonies, things that the government tried to keep secret from the general public. Most people assumed these stories were just science fiction, but Rodriguez had been in space long enough to know that the universe was full of surprises. "Send another message to Earth Command," he ordered. "Tell them we need immediate guidance on how to proceed, and ask them if they have any specialists on board who might be able to help with this situation." As Sarah sent the message, Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. He activated the ship's internal communication system and made an announcement to all passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the ongoing situation at New Geneva Colony, we may need to delay our landing for several hours or possibly longer. For the safety of all passengers, we are asking anyone with specialized knowledge of biological or scientific phenomena to contact the bridge immediately. Thank you for your patience during this difficult time." In the first-class cabin, Marcus heard the announcement and felt his heart rate increase. The captain's request for specialists in biological phenomena was clearly directed at people like him, but revealing his expertise would mean exposing his secret mission to everyone on the ship, including Linda. He looked at his tablet and saw that he had received another urgent message from his supervisor. "Marcus, preliminary reports suggest possible xenobiological threat at New Geneva. Your immediate expertise may be required. Contact ship's captain if necessary." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had spent his entire career working in secret, protecting humanity from threats that most people did not even know existed. But now it seemed that secrecy might have to take a back seat to the immediate crisis. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Linda, who had been relatively quiet for the past hour, immediately noticed his movement. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked suspiciously. The captain said to remain seated. He also asked for specialists to contact the bridge. Marcus replied calmly. Linda laughed mockingly. "Specialists, you? In what, pretending to be important?" Marcus ignored her comment and walked toward the front of the cabin. Carol, the flight attendant, intercepted him before he could reach the door to the bridge. "Sir, I'm sorry, but passengers are not allowed in the bridge area," she said politely. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a different identification card, one that Linda had not seen before. This card was black with silver lettering and bore the official seal of Earth's Defense Council. "My name is Dr. Marcus Johnson," he said quietly. "I'm with the Xenobiological Research Division of Earth Defense Command. I believe the captain may need my assistance." Carol's eyes widened as she read the card. She had never seen credentials like these before, but the official seals and security features made it clear that this was no ordinary identification. "Please wait here, sir," she said respectfully. "I'll contact the bridge immediately." Linda had followed Marcus to the front of the cabin and was straining to hear the conversation. When she heard him claim to be with Earth Defense Command, she became even more agitated. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly. "Now he's claiming to be some kind of secret agent or something. Can't you see that he's just making things up?" But Carol was already speaking into her communication device. "Bridge, this is Carol in first class. I have a passenger here who says he's Dr. Marcus Johnson with the Xenobiological Research Division. He has official credentials and says he may be able to help with the current situation." The response from the bridge was immediate. "Send him up right away." Carol turned to Marcus with a new level of respect in her voice. Please follow me, sir. The captain will see you immediately. As Marcus walked toward the bridge, Linda stood in the aisle staring after him with her mouth open. Colonel Martinez, who had been watching the entire exchange, could not help but smile at her expression. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I think you may have made a very serious mistake." On the bridge, Captain Rodriguez was pacing back and forth when Marcus entered. The captain was a man in his 50s with graying hair and worried eyes. When he saw Marcus, he immediately walked over to greet him. "Dr. Johnson, thank you for coming forward. I understand you're with the Xenobiological Research Division?" "That's correct, Captain," Marcus replied. He showed his credentials and explained his background. "I specialize in hostile alien life forms and containment protocols. I was returning from a classified mission when your emergency began." Captain Rodriguez felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Doctor, we're receiving very strange energy readings from New Geneva. Our sensors are detecting biological signatures unlike anything in our database. Do you have any idea what we might be dealing with?" Marcus studied the sensor readings on the bridge displays. What he saw made his blood run cold. The energy patterns were similar to something he had encountered before, during his research into ancient alien artifacts. If his suspicions were correct, the situation at New Geneva was far worse than anyone had imagined. "Captain, I need to ask you something very important," Marcus said. "Has the colony been doing any deep excavation work recently? Digging deeper than usual into the planet's core?" "Yes, actually," Rodriguez replied. "According to their last reports, they had discovered some unusual mineral deposits and were excavating at unprecedented depths." "Why do you ask?" Marcus felt his worst fears being confirmed. "Because I think they may have awakened something that was meant to stay buried." Back in the first-class cabin, Linda was still standing in the aisle, trying to process what had just happened. The man she had been harassing for hours was apparently a real scientist with genuine credentials. Worse, he seemed to be exactly the kind of expert that the ship needed to deal with the current crisis. But Linda was too proud and too stubborn to admit that she had been wrong. Instead, she convinced herself that there must be some kind of mistake or conspiracy. "This has to be fake," she said to anyone who would listen. "There's no way that man is really a government scientist. He probably just has fake identification cards." Colonel Martinez shook his head in disgust. "Ma'am, those credentials were real. I've seen them before. Dr. Johnson is one of the most respected experts in his field." "How would you know?" Linda demanded. "Because I've worked with him before," Martinez replied. "And if he's on this ship, it means something very serious is happening at New Geneva." On the bridge of the Aurora Dawn, Marcus stood before the main display screen studying the sensor readings from New Geneva colony. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The energy patterns were not random or chaotic. They showed clear signs of intelligence and purpose. Something was actively spreading across the planet's surface, consuming everything in its path. "Captain, I need you to understand how serious this situation is," Marcus said, his voice grave and steady. "Based on these readings, I believe the mining operation has disturbed something that has been dormant for thousands of years. We're not dealing with a natural disaster or equipment failure. We're dealing with a hostile alien organism." Captain Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. "Alien organism? Are you certain?" Marcus pointed to specific patterns on the display. "Look at these energy signatures. They're expanding in a perfect spiral pattern from the mining site. Natural phenomena don't behave this way. This is a biological entity that's systematically consuming all organic matter it encounters." Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked up from her communication console with fear in her eyes. "Sir, I've been monitoring emergency frequencies from other ships in the area. 3 cargo vessels that were scheduled to land at New Geneva have gone completely silent. The last transmission from one of them mentioned something about the planet's surface being covered in a moving gray substance." "Gray substance?" Marcus asked quickly. "Yes, sir. The pilot said it looked like liquid metal, but it was moving against the wind and flowing uphill. He said it seemed to be alive." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had hoped he was wrong, but the evidence was becoming overwhelming. "Captain, I need to access your ship's database immediately." "I'm looking for any information about ancient alien artifacts or biological weapons." As Marcus worked at the computer terminal, he explained what he believed was happening. Thousands of years ago, before humans ever left Earth, there was a war between 2 alien civilizations in this sector. One of them created biological weapons designed to consume all life on enemy planets. These weapons were so effective that they eventually destroyed both civilizations. But that was thousands of years ago, Rodriguez said. How could anything survive that long? These organisms were designed to go dormant when they ran out of food, Marcus explained. They can remain inactive for millennia, waiting for the right conditions to awaken them. The deep mining operation at New Geneva must have broken through to a chamber where one of these weapons was stored. Sarah looked up from her station again. Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from Earth Defense Command. It's encrypted and marked with the highest security classification. Marcus moved to the communication station and entered his personal access codes. The message that appeared on the screen made his face go pale. Orbital scans confirm massive biological contamination at New Geneva colony. Estimated population loss is 100%. Contamination appears to be spreading to neighboring systems. Dr. Johnson is hereby authorized to use any means necessary to contain the threat. Full military support is being mobilized, but you are currently the closest asset to the crisis zone. Captain Rodriguez read the message over Marcus's shoulder and felt his knees go weak. 100% population loss? 50,000 people? The organism doesn't just kill, Marcus explained. It converts all organic matter into more of itself. Every person, every plant, every animal on that planet has now become part of the alien weapon, and if we don't stop it soon, it will spread to other worlds. The bridge fell silent as the full scope of the crisis became clear. They were not just dealing with a local emergency anymore. They were facing a threat that could potentially destroy all life in the galaxy. What do we do? Rodriguez asked. Do we turn around and head back to Earth? Marcus shook his head. We can't run from this. The organism will eventually find a way to spread beyond New Geneva, and when it does, nowhere will be safe. Our only chance is to stop it here and now. But how? You said this thing destroyed 2 entire alien civilizations. What can we possibly do against something like that? Marcus walked back to his computer terminal and began accessing files from his research division. During my last mission, I was studying ancient alien technology that was specifically designed to fight these biological weapons. I have the research data with me in my personal case. You mean you actually know how to stop this thing? Sarah asked with hope in her voice. I know how they were stopped before, Marcus said carefully. The question is whether we can implement the same solution with the resources we have available. As Marcus worked, he explained the science behind the alien biological weapons. These organisms are incredibly advanced, but they have one weakness. They require a specific type of electromagnetic field to maintain their cellular structure. If we can generate the right frequency of electromagnetic pulse, we can disrupt their ability to function. Can this ship generate that kind of pulse? Rodriguez asked. Marcus studied the ship's technical specifications. Not alone, but if we can modify the main engines and coordinate with other ships in the area, we might be able to create a large enough field to affect the entire planet. The plan was incredibly dangerous and had never been attempted before. It would require precise timing and coordination between multiple ships, and there was no guarantee that it would work. But it was their only hope of stopping the biological weapon before it spread to other worlds. How long do we have? Rodriguez asked. Marcus looked at the latest sensor readings and felt his heart sink. Based on the current rate of expansion, the organism will reach critical mass within 6 hours. After that, it will begin producing spores that can survive in space and spread to other planets. Once that happens, there will be no way to stop it. Back in the first-class cabin, the passengers were becoming increasingly anxious about the lack of information. The captain's earlier announcement about specialists had created more questions than answers, and people were beginning to fear the worst. Linda Patterson was still trying to convince anyone who would listen that Marcus was a fraud. I don't care what kind of fake credentials he has, she said loudly. There's no way that man is really a government scientist. He's probably just taking advantage of the situation to make himself look important. But her audience was shrinking. Most of the other passengers had begun to realize that something very serious was happening, and Linda's continued harassment of Marcus was starting to seem petty and ridiculous in the face of a real crisis. Colonel Martinez had been listening to communications from his military contacts, and what he was hearing made him very worried. Ma'am, he said to Linda, I think you need to understand that Dr. Johnson is probably the most important person on this ship right now. If the rumors I'm hearing are true, he may be our only hope of surviving whatever is happening at New Geneva. Linda's face turned red with anger, That's impossible. You're all just buying into some elaborate hoax. Mark my words, when this is all over, we'll find out that he's nothing but a con artist. But even as she spoke the words, Linda was beginning to have doubts. The serious expressions on the faces of the crew members, the encrypted communications, and the obvious respect that Captain Rodriguez had shown to Marcus all suggested that something very real and very dangerous was happening. As the Aurora Dawn continued its approach to New Geneva, the fate of not just the passengers on board, but potentially all life in the galaxy hung in the balance. While Marcus worked desperately on the bridge to find a solution to the crisis at New Geneva, Linda Patterson remained in the first-class cabin, still refusing to accept what was happening around her. The evidence was mounting that Marcus was exactly who he claimed to be, but Linda's pride and prejudice made it impossible for her to admit she had been wrong. The other passengers were now openly discussing the seriousness of the situation. Word had spread throughout the cabin that the man Linda had been harassing was actually a government scientist who was working to save them all. But instead of feeling embarrassed or apologetic, Linda became even more aggressive in her attacks. "This is all a setup," she announced loudly to anyone who would listen.
"Can't you see what's happening here?"
"They're using this fake emergency to make him look like some kind of hero. It's all part of the diversity agenda." A businessman sitting across the aisle looked at her with disgust. "Lady, are you seriously suggesting that the government created a fake emergency just to make one man look good? Do you have any idea how crazy that sounds? Crazier than believing that he's really a scientist?" Linda shot back. "Look at him. Does he look like someone who went to medical school? Does he look like someone who would be trusted with important government secrets?" The businessman shook his head and turned away from her. He had tried to reason with Linda, but it was clear that she was beyond rational discussion. Colonel Martinez had been listening to the conversation with growing anger. As a military officer, he had worked with many brilliant scientists and researchers of all backgrounds. The idea that someone's appearance could determine their qualifications was not only wrong, it was dangerous, ma'am, he said firmly. "I need you to understand something. Dr. Johnson is one of the most respected experts in his field. I have personally seen him save lives and prevent disasters. Your continued attacks on him are not only inappropriate, they're potentially putting everyone on this ship in danger." Linda turned her full attention to Martinez. "Oh, so now you're part of the conspiracy too? Let me guess, you're going to tell me that he's some kind of war hero as well?" "Actually, yes," Martinez replied calmly. "During the crisis on Titan Station 3 years ago, Dr. Johnson's research prevented a biological disaster that could have killed thousands of people. He received a commendation from the president himself." Linda laughed bitterly. "The president? Which president? The one who got elected because of affirmative action policies? Of course he would give awards to people like this man. It's all part of the same system." The conversation was becoming so heated that other passengers were starting to stare. Carol, the flight attendant, approached the group with a concerned expression. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to keep your voice down," she said to Linda. "Your comments are disturbing other passengers." "My comments are disturbing them?" Linda asked incredulously. "What about the lies they're spreading about that man? What about the way they're trying to make him into some kind of hero when we all know the truth?" "And what truth is that?" Carol asked. "That he's a fraud," Linda said confidently. "That his credentials are fake, that his job is made up, and that this whole situation is designed to make people like me look bad for asking reasonable questions." Carol had seen Marcus's credentials herself, and she knew they were real. She had also spoken to the captain, who had confirmed that Marcus was indeed helping to address the crisis at New Geneva. Linda's refusal to accept reality was becoming genuinely concerning. "Ma'am, I can assure you that Dr. Johnson's credentials are completely legitimate," Carol said. "The captain has verified his identity and is currently working with him to address the emergency." But Linda was too deep into her conspiracy theory to be swayed by facts. Of course the captain would say that. He's probably been told to go along with the story. This whole thing is bigger than just one man. It's about changing society and making people like me accept lower standards. A young woman sitting nearby finally spoke up. "Lower standards? The man has a doctorate degree and works for the government. What higher standards are you looking for?" "Real standards," Linda replied. "Standards based on merit instead of skin color. Standards that require people to actually earn their positions instead of having them handed to them because of diversity quotas." The young woman looked shocked. "How do you know he didn't earn his position?" How do you know he didn't work harder than anyone else to get where he is? Because I know how the system works, Linda said. I've been in business for 30 years and I've seen how these diversity programs operate. They lower the bar so that certain people can meet it, and then they pretend that everyone is equally qualified. Colonel Martinez could not contain his anger any longer. Ma'am, you are making assumptions based on nothing but prejudice. Dr. Johnson graduated at the top of his class from Harvard Medical School and has published more research papers than most scientists publish in their entire careers. His qualifications are beyond question. Linda stared at Martinez with suspicion. How do you know so much about his background? Are you reading from some prepared script? I know because I've worked with him, Martinez said through gritted teeth. I've seen his work firsthand and I've seen the results of his research. He's saved more lives than you could possibly imagine. Saved lives how? Linda demanded. By studying imaginary aliens? By pretending to be an expert in made-up science? Give me a break. What Linda did not understand was that xenobiology was far from imaginary. Humanity's expansion into space had brought contact with dozens of alien species, some friendly and some hostile. Understanding alien biology was essential for human survival, and experts like Marcus were literally the difference between life and death for entire colonies. But Linda lived in a world where the most dangerous thing she had ever faced was a bad harvest or a difficult business negotiation. The idea that there were real threats in the galaxy and that someone like Marcus could be humanity's protection against those threats was beyond her comprehension. You want to know what I think? Linda said, her voice rising to near shouting levels. I think this whole situation is a test. I think they're seeing how easily they can manipulate people into believing their lies, and I'm not going to fall for it. The other passengers were now staring at Linda with a mixture of disgust and pity. Her refusal to accept reality had become so extreme that she seemed to be losing touch with sanity itself. Carol made a decision. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to remain in your seat and stop making these accusations. Your behavior is becoming disruptive to the other passengers. Disruptive? Linda asked. I'm the only one here who's telling the truth. I'm the only one who's not being fooled by this elaborate charade. As Linda continued her rant, none of the passengers realized just how serious the situation really was. On the bridge, Marcus was working frantically to prevent a disaster that could destroy not just New Geneva, but potentially every inhabited world in the galaxy. The biological weapon that had been awakened was more dangerous than anything humanity had ever faced. If Marcus could not find a way to stop it, Linda's complaints about diversity and qualifications would become meaningless in the face of universal extinction, but Linda was too consumed with her own prejudices to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Even as the fate of civilization hung in the balance, she continued to focus on her petty grievances and her refusal to acknowledge that someone different from her could be genuinely important and accomplished. The Aurora Dawn had reached the outer edge of the New Geneva system, and the view from the bridge was unlike anything Captain Rodriguez had ever seen. The planet that should have been a thriving blue and green world was now covered in a sickly gray substance that pulsed and moved like a living thing. Marcus stood at the main sensor console, his fingers moving rapidly across the controls as he analyzed the readings. The situation was even worse than he had feared. The biological weapon had not only consumed the entire colony, but it had begun to spread beyond the planet's atmosphere. Tendrils of the gray substance were reaching into space, searching for new sources of organic matter to consume. Captain, we need to act immediately, Marcus said urgently. The organism has reached critical mass. If we don't stop it in the next 30 minutes, it will begin producing space-capable spores that can travel to other worlds. Captain Rodriguez looked at the terrifying scene on the main display. Tell me what you need, Doctor. Marcus had spent the last 2 hours modifying the ship's systems based on his research into ancient alien technology. The solution was incredibly complex and dangerous, requiring precise coordination between multiple systems that were never designed to work together. I need you to contact every ship within communication range, Marcus said. We're going to need at least 6 vessels to create an electromagnetic net around the planet. Each ship will need to modify their engines to generate a specific frequency pulse. Will that destroy the organism? Rodriguez asked. Not destroy it, but it will force it back into dormancy, Marcus explained. The electromagnetic field will disrupt the creature's cellular structure and cause it to retreat underground. It won't be permanently defeated, but it will buy us time to develop a more permanent solution. Lieutenant Sarah Kim had been monitoring communications from other ships in the area. Sir, I have 4 cargo vessels and 2 passenger ships within range, but some of them are reporting damage from attempting to get too close to the planet. Patch me through to all of them, Marcus said. I need to explain the procedure directly. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus worked with the captains and engineers of 6 different ships, walking them through the complex modifications needed to create the electromagnetic net. It was the most challenging coordination effort he had ever attempted, requiring split-second timing and precise frequency matching across multiple vessels. Remember, Marcus told the other captains, the pulse must be exactly 847.3 terahertz and all ships must fire simultaneously. If even one ship is off by more than 0.1%, the entire plan will fail. As the ships moved into position around New Geneva, Marcus retrieved the black case from his cabin. Inside were research notes and technical specifications that represented years of study into ancient alien technology. He had never expected to use this knowledge in a real crisis, but now the survival of humanity might depend on it. On the bridge, every crew member was focused on their instruments. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Captain Rodriguez had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. The fate of potentially billions of people rested on the success of an untested procedure designed by a man he had met only hours earlier. All ships report. Ready, Sarah announced. Marcus took a deep breath and activated the communication system. This is Dr. Johnson. All ships prepare to fire electromagnetic pulse on my mark. Remember, we only get one chance at this. If we fail, the organism will adapt and become immune to future attempts. The seconds stretched like hours as Marcus watched the sensor readings. The gray substance on the planet's surface was continuing to expand, and the space-bound tendrils were growing longer and stronger. They were running out of time. 5 seconds, Marcus announced. 4, 3, 2, 1, fire! 7 ships simultaneously released massive electromagnetic pulses that converged on New Geneva like invisible lightning bolts. The energy readings on the sensors spiked to levels that should have been impossible, and for a moment the entire planet seemed to glow with an eerie blue light. Then, something amazing happened. The gray substance that had covered the planet's surface began to retreat. Like a tide in reverse, it flowed back toward the mining sites where it had first emerged. The space-bound tendrils withered and disappeared, and the sickly glow that had surrounded the planet faded away. It's working, Sarah shouted with excitement. The organism is retreating. Marcus watched the sensor readings carefully, not allowing himself to celebrate until he was certain the plan had succeeded. The electromagnetic pulse had disrupted the creature's ability to maintain its expanded form, forcing it to concentrate its mass back into the underground chambers where it had originally been dormant. The organism has returned to dormancy, Marcus announced. All ships can stand down from attack positions. Captain Rodriguez felt a wave of relief wash over him. Doctor, what happens now? Is the threat permanently eliminated? Not permanently, Marcus admitted. But we've bought ourselves time. The organism will remain dormant as long as nothing disturbs it again. I'll need to file a report with Earth Defense Command recommending that New Geneva be declared a restricted zone until we can develop a permanent solution. As news of the successful operation spread throughout the Aurora Dawn, the passengers began to realize just how close they had come to disaster. The man who many of them had seen being harassed in first class had just saved not only their lives, but potentially all life in the galaxy. Back in the first-class cabin, Linda Patterson sat in stunned silence as she overheard other passengers discussing what had happened. The words biological weapon, galaxy-wide threat, and saved humanity kept being repeated, and slowly the truth began to penetrate her wall of denial. Colonel Martinez approached her seat with a serious expression. Ma'am, I think you owe Dr. Johnson an apology. What he just accomplished will probably be remembered as one of the greatest achievements in human history. Linda's face had gone pale, and for the first time since the flight began, she seemed to be at a loss for words. The magnitude of what Marcus had done was starting to sink in, and with it came the realization of how badly she had misjudged him. I don't understand, she said quietly. How could he be so important? How could I have been so wrong? Because you judged him based on his appearance instead of his character, Martinez replied. You assumed that someone who looked different from you couldn't be accomplished or important. That assumption almost cost you the chance to witness one of the most heroic acts in human history. As the Aurora Dawn prepared to return to Earth with news of the crisis and its resolution, Marcus remained on the bridge filing detailed reports about the incident. He felt no satisfaction in proving Linda wrong, only relief that the threat had been contained before it could spread to other worlds. The biological weapon that had destroyed 2 alien civilizations thousands of years ago had been stopped by human ingenuity, courage, and the kind of scientific expertise that Linda had dismissed as impossible. In saving New Geneva, Marcus had also saved something else: humanity's future among the stars. But perhaps most importantly, he had demonstrated that heroism comes in all colors, and that the greatest threats to humanity are often overcome by the very people that prejudice tells us to dismiss. The Aurora Dawn was now safely away from New Geneva and heading back toward Earth. The immediate crisis was over, but the full impact of what had happened was just beginning to sink in for everyone on board. Captain Rodriguez had received confirmation from Earth Defense Command that the biological threat had been successfully contained, and that Dr. Marcus Johnson's actions had prevented what could have been the worst disaster in human history. As Marcus finally returned to the first-class cabin after spending nearly 6 hours on the bridge, he looked exhausted but relieved. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But he had saved the day, and everyone on the ship owed him their lives. The moment Marcus appeared in the cabin doorway, conversation stopped and all eyes turned toward him. The man who had been dismissed and harassed just hours earlier was now revealed as one of humanity's greatest heroes. The contrast between how he had been treated and what he had accomplished was not lost on anyone. Captain Rodriguez followed Marcus into the cabin, having decided that the passengers deserved to know the full truth about what had happened. He activated the cabin's communication system and spoke in a voice filled with respect and admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about the man who just saved all of our lives. Dr. Marcus Johnson is one of Earth's leading experts on hostile alien life forms. The crisis at New Geneva was caused by an ancient biological weapon that had been dormant for thousands of years. This weapon had previously destroyed 2 entire alien civilizations, and if it had not been stopped today, it would have spread throughout the galaxy, consuming every form of life it encountered." The passengers listened in stunned silence as the captain continued. Dr. Johnson not only identified the threat, but he also developed and implemented the solution that forced the organism back into dormancy. His actions today prevented what could have been the extinction of all life in our galaxy. Without his expertise, none of us would be alive right now. As the captain's words sank in, something beautiful began to happen. One by one, the passengers began to stand up. It started with Colonel Martinez, who rose from his seat and began to clap. Then the young woman who had defended Marcus earlier joined in, followed by the businessman who had argued with Linda. Within moments, every person in the first-class cabin was on their feet, applauding Marcus with genuine gratitude and respect. The sound of clapping filled the cabin, growing louder and more enthusiastic as more passengers joined in. It was a spontaneous outpouring of appreciation for the man who had saved them all. Marcus stood at the front of the cabin, clearly moved by the response. He was not used to public recognition for his work, which was usually conducted in secret. For a man who had spent his career protecting humanity from behind the scenes, the open acknowledgement of his contributions was both overwhelming and deeply meaningful. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin despite the applause. "But I want you to know that what happened today was not the work of one person. It required the cooperation and courage of every ship captain and crew member who participated in the operation. We succeeded because we worked together." The applause continued for several more minutes, with passengers calling out words of thanks and admiration. Some people were crying with relief, finally understanding how close they had all come to death. Others were simply amazed to be in the presence of someone who had accomplished something so extraordinary. But there was one person in the cabin who was not standing or applauding. Linda Patterson remained in her seat, staring at Marcus with a mixture of shock, shame, and disbelief. The full weight of her behavior was crushing down on her like a physical force. She had spent hours attacking and degrading the very man who had just saved her life and the lives of everyone she cared about. As the applause finally began to die down and passengers started to return to their seats, Linda slowly stood up. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking as she made her way toward Marcus. Every step felt like a mile, and every eye in the cabin was on her as she approached the man she had so viciously attacked. When she reached Marcus, Linda stopped and looked up at him with tears in her eyes. For several long seconds, she could not find the words to express what she was feeling. The shame was overwhelming, but she knew she had to try to make amends for her behavior. "Dr. Johnson," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology. I owe you the biggest apology that one person can give to another." Marcus looked at her with compassion rather than anger. He had encountered prejudice many times in his life, and he understood that it often came from fear and ignorance rather than true malice. "Thank you for saying that, Ms. Patterson." "No, you don't understand," Linda continued, her voice growing stronger. "What I did to you today was inexcusable. I judged you based on your appearance instead of your character. I questioned your qualifications without knowing anything about your background. I treated you like you didn't belong here, when the truth is that you're probably the most important person on this entire ship." The other passengers watched in silence as Linda struggled to find the right words. Her public acknowledgement of her mistakes was as powerful as her earlier attacks had been harmful. "I have spent my entire life believing that I was a good person," Linda said. "I thought I was successful and intelligent and fair. But today I learned something terrible about myself. I learned that I am capable of treating another human being with cruelty and disrespect, for no reason other than the color of his skin. And I am ashamed." Marcus extended his hand toward Linda. "Ms. Patterson, we all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them and do better in the future." Linda took his hand gratefully, tears streaming down her face. "How can you be so kind to me after the way I treated you? You just saved my life, and I spent the day trying to make your life miserable." "Because holding on to anger and resentment only hurts everyone involved," Marcus replied. "And because I believe that people can change and grow if they're willing to confront their own mistakes honestly." The conversation between Marcus and Linda was being watched by every passenger in the cabin. Many of them were thinking about their own behavior during the crisis. Some felt guilty for not speaking up when Linda was harassing Marcus. Others were examining their own prejudices and assumptions. Colonel Martinez approached the pair and spoke to Linda directly. "Ma'am, what Dr. Johnson just showed you was grace. Real grace. I hope you'll remember this moment for the rest of your life." Linda nodded through her tears. "I will, I promise I will. And I'm going to make sure that I never treat another person the way I treated him today." As the Aurora Dawn continued its journey back to Earth, the atmosphere in the cabin was completely different from what it had been at the beginning of the flight. The crisis at New Geneva had revealed both the worst and the best of human nature. Linda's initial behavior had shown how prejudice and ignorance could lead to cruelty and injustice. But Marcus's heroism and subsequent forgiveness had demonstrated the power of knowledge, courage, and compassion. The story of what happened on the Aurora Dawn would eventually become famous throughout human space. It would be told as an example of how prejudice blinds us to the true worth of others, and how the people we might be tempted to dismiss could turn out to be our greatest heroes. But for Marcus, the most important part of the story was not his heroic actions or the standing ovation he received. It was the moment when Linda Patterson looked him in the eye and acknowledged her mistakes. Because in that moment he saw proof that even the deepest prejudices could be overcome, and that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its weapons, but its capacity for growth and redemption. As the ship prepared for its arrival at Earth, Marcus returned to his seat and pulled out his tablet to begin writing his official report. There would be debriefings and investigations and probably medals and honors. But right now he was just grateful to be alive and to have played a part in ensuring that humanity would continue to thrive among the stars. The standing ovation had been nice, but the real victory was in the hearts and minds of people who had learned to see beyond the surface and recognize the true value of every human being.